The crowd pressed in as twilight sank over the neighborhood. Faces twisted with dread and fury. In the center of the circle lay a small, still form. A little girl in a pink dress, stained nearly black, crouched above her, was a large German shepherd, his bloodied snout and chest bristling as he growled low and deep the dog's amber. Eyes flicked rapidly between the girl and the officer, stepping forward, refusing to move, even as he stood lopsided on a broken leg. "Stay back." "Officer Patterson?" barked, loading a syringe with clear fluid. "Animal controls, still 10 minutes out, we don't have that long." From the far end of the circle, a wavering voice broke through. "You don't know what you're doing." But Patterson had already raised the needle, aiming it toward the exhausted dog's trembling neck. "Leave a like, and drop your city in the comments below." And now back to the story. Mason Reynolds sat in silence on his porch, deep lines, mapping 60 years of a life hard lived. 5 years had passed since he'd been forced to give up Rex, the only partner who'd ever truly had his back. In 2 decades with Border Patrol, Rex wasn't just any German shepherd. He was a legend. 6 lives, saved dozens of drug busts, and more. Illegal crossings stopped than any other dog in the sector, but more than the stats was their unshakable bond, the kind of trust you only build through shared danger. They told him he made the right call when his wife Eleanor's cancer devoured their savings. He'd had to choose the treatment or the dog. There wasn't enough for both. And when he asked to adopt Rex, the department had said no, too expensive, too old to keep. Budget's tight. Mason, they'd said they promised he'd go to another agency somewhere good, but Mason had been around too long to buy that line old dogs didn't get. Second chances. Rex had bounced between shelters until Mason lost all trace of him across town. In a quiet cul-de-sac called Oak Ridge Heights, 6-year-old Emma Whitfield hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. The doctors called it selective mutism, born from trauma. She'd seen a deadly crash while riding home from kindergarten. Since then, not a word. Just twisted drawings of Rex and thick red scribbles. Her parents, Sarah and Daniel, worked opposite schedules to save on daycare. Their marriage wearing thin under the weight of Emma's silence. "She'll talk when she's ready," Sarah would mutter, tying her nursing shoes before the night shift at Memorial Hospital. Daniel barely responded, his mind buried in blueprints and contractor calls. Neither saw how their daughter lingered at the upstairs window, eyes scanning the world, but never stepping into it across the street. 76-year-old Sheila Donovan kept watch behind her lace curtains, unofficial captain of the neighborhood watch, and, proud of it, she noticed everything. The sneaky teen sneaking back home, the neighbor's overflowing mailbox, and lately a lean German shepherd with a haunted look that slipped through the edges of the subdivision like he was guarding something. Or someone. Ranger first showed up in Oak Ridge Heights one late September Tuesday, just as the desert heat gave way to cooler evenings. His coat was dull ribs showing through, and an old scar sliced above his right eye. He moved like a soldier who'd seen too much each step, careful, and controlled a dog that knew people could be cruel. Most neighbors didn't see a protector, they saw a threat. They dialed animal control, saying there was a stray German shepherd stalking Maple Street. By the time the van rolled in, Ranger would vanish into the brush like he knew that engine by heart. Sheila saw the pattern after 3 days, and something about it tugged at her. The dog wasn't wandering, he had a mission every afternoon. Around 4:30 he emerged from the trees and curled beneath the big oak tree outside the Whitfields' home, always watching the second-floor balcony, ears perked, and still like a soldier standing post. Then on day 4, Sheila finally saw it. Emma Whitfield, barefoot on the balcony, clutching something wrapped in a napkin. She leaned over the railing and gently dropped it. The dog caught it in the air without so much as a flinch, then looked up at her as if waiting for more. "Well, I'll be," Sheila whispered, adjusting her glasses. For the next 20 minutes, the two remained locked in that silent ritual, Emma tossing little pieces of food, Ranger receiving them like sacred gifts. When her mother called her in, Emma vanished into the house, and the dog faded back into the trees. The routine didn't stop for weeks. Sheila recorded each moment in the same spiral notebook she used for keeping tabs on late garbage pickups. Day 12, dog looks cleaner. Emma brought water to. Day 16, Emma reading aloud on balcony, dog ears flicking like he's listening. Day 19, Emma smiled when he caught the biscuit midair. Inside the Whitfield home, stress mounted. Daniel's firm was chasing a huge retail build, and the pressure was making him short-tempered. Sarah's shifts doubled with the flu outbreak. She was running on fumes. Their daughter's silence hovered between them like a third presence. Neither could reach Dr. Matthews wants us to consider a residential program, Daniel said one night, staring at the wall. It's been nearly 2 years. Sarah, we're out of options. Sarah folded a towel and held it to her chest. She's 6. We're not sending her away like some case we gave up on. I'm not giving up. I'm drowning. I'm working nonstop to pay for therapists who do nothing. We can't afford to keep pretending. These late-night arguments became part of the house's rhythm. What they didn't realize was that Emma heard every word from the top stair and outside beneath her window. So did Ranger by the 3rd week. Ranger had locked into his schedule. Mornings were for scavenging through the alleys and backyards of Oak Heights. By now, Sheila had started leaving kibble and a bowl of water behind her shed. Don't look at me like that, Butterscotch, she muttered to her cat. He's not hurting anyone. Afternoons, Ranger bathed himself in the creek near the park, scrubbing away dirt and blood like a soldier cleaning his gear. By dusk, he'd return to his post under the oak tree, ever alert to Emma's presence and always choosing spots with quick escape routes. Emma began to wait for him too, and inside her desk drawer she kept her own little stash of goodies hidden under her beds, snuck from the pantry when no one was watching. She'd sketched drawings of Ranger during therapy. But when the counselor gently asked about the dog, Emma just shrugged, keeping their secret safe. One rainy afternoon, when rain wouldn't let her go outside, Ranger waited for nearly 3 hours at the fence before finally walking awares down, tail dragging. The next day, Emma dropped twice as many treats, one of them tied with a note, a hand-drawn frown under rain, and a smiling sun. If Ranger understood her apology, he showed it by waiting even longer than usual. Standing tall beneath her window, like a silent promise, their bond kept growing without words. Zima began bringing her math workbook to the balcony, scribbling equations while Ranger watched below. Sometimes she held her answers up like flashcards, and Ranger would tilt his head like he was grading her. Sheila watched it all with rising curiosity. Twice she thought about telling Sarah what her daughter was doing, but something always stopped her. She'd tell Butterscotch while knitting. Some things people gotta find for themselves. Besides, she'd heard enough of the Whitfields' shouting matches to know they weren't looking for simple miracles, not the kind that show up as a dog beneath a window or a quiet girl trying to speak again. October blew in colder winds and deeper tension. The shouting at night grew louder. A bed opened up at Brightwater Residential for November, and the Whitfields had to decide fast. The house carried a weight to its Sierra, taking double shifts, Daniel staying late at job sites. Emma withdrew more and more, letting her drawings do the talking. She'd lower pictures on strings clouds, sunshine, teardrops. Ranger examined each one like it meant something. Then he'd lift his gaze to meet hers, amber eyes calm and knowing. That dog understands her better than either of those parents, Sheila said to Mrs. Patterson during bridge night. He's not some mangy stray. That's a trained animal, probably military. I'd bet my pension on it. Nobody else saw the change. Nobody realized reports of a dangerous dog in the neighborhood had stopped, or that Emma's therapist noted subtle progress, more focus, less anxiety even, if she still didn't speak. Only Sheila noticed how Ranger circled the Whitfields, yard every night, nose low, tail steady, before settling below Emma's window, guarding the one person who had shown him grace when the world turned its back. Friday night, a storm rolled into Oak Ridge Heights. Not just the thunder gathering over the hills, but a storm brewing in the Whitfields' 2-story colonial. Daniel got home early, gripping an envelope the signed admission papers for Emma's stay at Brightwater. Sarah's hospital shift had ended at 6. By 7, their voices echoed off the walls. The house itself seemed to flinch. I already signed my part, Daniel snapped, dropping the envelope on the counter. 3 months, Sarah. That's all I'm asking. Let them try, because we clearly can't reach her. Sarah stood at the sink, fists clenched around her dish towel. You don't send away a child who's hurting. You hold them tighter. We've been holding on for 18 months, Daniel fired back. She's behind in school. The teachers are concerned. And Dr. Matthews says if we wait any longer. He stopped and dragged both hands through his hair, eyes dark with exhaustion. What's your plan then? Another year of silence? My plan, Sarah said, voice trembling, is to not abandon our daughter. Not now, not when she needs us most. Upstairs, Emma sat cross-legged against the wall beneath her window. At just 6 years old, she couldn't make sense of all the words, but the tone was familiar, sharp, rising, urgent. It was the same sound that filled the car right before the crash, the sound of something slipping away. She clutched her sketchpad tighter. On the page, Ranger, mid-run, tail up. The storm outside had calmed, for now, but the forecast called for severe gusts and hail. Her dad had even checked the basement emergency kit earlier. Emma rose and pressed her face to the glass. It was hard to see through the dark and drizzle. But then she spotted Himunda, the old oak, waiting like always. The sight of Ranger solid steady made her feel a little safer, a little less like she might disappear. Below, his eyes met hers, like he'd been expecting her all along. Inside, the shouting had reached full volume. "You think this is easy for me?" Daniel shouted. "You think I want to send her away?" "No," Sarah bit back. "I think it's easier than doing the hard work of loving her through this." Her voice shook with rage and heartbreak. "When's the last time you sat with her? Really? Sat with no phone? No agenda? When was the last time you tried to understand her, instead of just waiting for her to act normal again?" Her words lingered like smoke. Daniel didn't respond. Couldn't upstairs? Emma quietly unlatched the balcony door. Wind rushed in cold, smelling of ozone and wet leaves. Her hair blew across her face. She clutched her sketchpad to her chest and stepped outside. Below, Ranger rose instantly. His ears perked up, one soft wag of his tail. Emma had saved something special, a triangle of peanut butter sandwich wrapped in a napkin she'd planned. To toss it, like always, but this time she hesitated. The fight downstairs, the envelope on the table, the unfamiliar words. It all made her pause. Wind tugged at her shirt, stronger now. The oak groaned overhead. The balcony railing, when the house was built 15 years ago, had survived a dozen storms. But last winter's ice had cracked the joints, hairline fractures where the metal met brick. Daniel had noticed them, even mentioned them. But, like many things, it had gone on the later list. Recent rains had worsened the rust. As Emma leaned forward, one small hand on the railing, the other holding the sandwich ranger's gaze, never left her. His body was alert, like he was bracing for something. Inside, voices spiked again. "I made my decision," Daniel roared. "I'm not watching our daughter disappear." "Your decision," Sarah cried. "She's our daughter." Emma leaned out a little farther, trying to escape the sound, the fear, the feeling of being forgotten. Wind howled. The drawing pad slipped from her grasp pages, lifted into the sky like frightened birds. "Down, she's falling." No, Emma's mind screamed the word, but her lips never moved. Trapped behind the silence she hadn't broken in months. She sprang forward, her tiny frame lunging after the fluttering papers. Crayon-drawn images of a loyal friend, her only friend, spiraled downward toward the yard below. The balcony's rusted bolts let out a groan, one last strained cry, and then gave way. For a heartbeat, she was suspended weightless, lost between the sky's breath and gravity's pull. Emma's wide eyes blinked once, disoriented by the upside-down world. Her porch floating somewhere above her head. Below, Rurs moved. His instincts, honed in dusty war zones and border chases, fired before thought. Calculations, angle, speed, momentum ran through his body as naturally as breath. He sprang. Inside the house, the shouting paused her parents, freezing mid. At the sharp scream of tearing metal, followed by a sound that would echo in their nightmares, the shocked gasp of their mute daughter, finally making a sound. As she plummeted, then came the collision. The air left Rus's lungs in an explosive grunt. Emma's body hit him side first, her neck spared only by the German shepherd's solid chest. His muscular frame folded, cushioning her from the merciless ground. They tumbled fur-limbs, child, pajamas landing in a heap beneath the backyard oak. Emma's skull struck a thick root, not hard enough to kill, but enough to drive her into darkness. Rus's left leg twisted grotesquely under them, a sickening snap shattering the air. Something inside his ribs gave with a tearing sensation an echo of a wound from years ago, when he'd blocked a smuggler's blade. But even broken, his training held. With a breathless whimper, Rurs shifted his shattered body to cover Emma's limp frame, forming a living barrier against any further danger. Blood seeped from a jagged slash on his flank and trickled down Emma's temple where the broken railing had raked her. To anyone watching, the scene was unmistakable and deeply wrong. The first to see was Mr. Patterson, next door, securing a tarp ahead of the storm. He shouted. Others came Mrs. Levine from across the street, the Anderson boys sprinting from their porch, Mr. Grayson tugging along his poodle. "Oh my God, that dog's attacking her," someone cried. "Get help! He's killing that little girl." More voices piled on. "It's that stray I told y'all." Daniel was first out the door, Sarah close behind. What they saw froze them. Blood. Everywhere their daughter motionless beneath a snarling dog, a huge German shepherd foam at the mouth, fur matted with red stood rigid above her, teeth flashing at the crowd. "Emma!" Sarah's voice tore through the hysteria. She surged forward, panic overriding logic. Rurs, battered and blind with pain, let out a guttural growl, halting her in her tracks. She staggered back, colliding with Daniel. "Animal control," Patterson barked, dialing fast, and the police. That dog just mauled a kid. Across the street, Sheila Donovan stood paralyzed behind her curtains. She had seen it every second, the balcony failing, the dog leaping, the rescue. But her arthritic legs betrayed her, her voice drowned by chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance. Rurs didn't move. His breath came in shallow bursts. His eyes burning with pain and fierce devotion never strayed from Emma's face. Blood pooled around them, his and hers, merging into a tragic tableau. 3 minutes later, Officer Brock Patterson arrived. Rain slicked the road. Tires skidded. In 15 years patrolling Oak Ridge Heights, he'd handled too many dog attacks. He still saw that Rottweiler's teeth clamped on a mailman's arm every time he closed his eyes. Large dogs were unpredictable, dangerous. This scene only confirmed it. Neighbors circled the yard. In the middle, a hulking shepherd stood drenched in blood over a lifeless child. A deep, rumbling growl warned anyone who dared approach. "Step back," Patterson barked, his hand hovering near his weapon. A woman Ceresse screamed, clawing against someone holding her back. "He's my baby, Emma." The dispatcher crackled in his ear. "Animal control is 10 minutes out. Ambulance, ETA 3, not good enough." Patterson popped his trunk, grabbed the trauma kit. Inside, nestled among gauze and gloves, was a Viel pentobarbital, meant for emergencies. Wildlife? Threats? No. Time to wait. "Officer, please." Daniel's voice cracked. "Just help her. Get her away from the dog." Syringe in one hand, baton in the other. Patterson moved. The dog didn't flee, didn't lunge, just stood, its broken leg barely holding, its eyes locked on the girl beneath. "Easy," Patterson muttered. The words were for himself, as much as the dog. "Last chance, buddy, move." That's when Sheila Donovan's voice finally broke. Through, "Don't you dare touch him." That dog saved her life. Her cane tapped rhythmically as she approached, frail but fiery. "Ma'am, please step back," Patterson snapped. "That animal's dangerous bull," she barked. He jumped up to catch her broke. The damn fall. He glanced her way. "Ma'am, with all respect, you're mistaken. Look at the blood from both of them, you idiot." She shot back. "He's hurt worse than she is." For a second, doubt flickered in his eyes, but years of procedure buried it. "We'll figure this out once the threat is neutralized." The dog was injured, unstable, potentially lethal. He was trained not to hesitate. Red and blue lights sliced through the storm clouds as the ambulance pulled up. 2 paramedics rushed out, but paused when Patterson raised his hand. "Don't move in yet," he ordered. "I need to neutralize the dog first." EMTs froze, watching the bloodied standoff. Sarah screamed again. Whitfield tore herself from her neighbor's grasp, her voice raw and trembling. "That's my baby, somebody. Help her." As Officer Patterson edged closer, the German shepherd drained reacted with a shift so slight only the attentive noticed. His threatening growl faded into a low whine as he looked at the unconscious girl at his feet, then back at the humans. Drawing near, eyes filled with something that looked like intent. "Look at him," Sheila urged, now addressing everyone, not just Patterson. "Does that look like a dog trying to hurt someone? He's guarding her." A few neighbors glanced at each other, unsure. The Anderson brothers' teenagers, with their phones pointed at the scenery, wound their footage. "She might be right," one mumbled, zooming in. "He's standing over her, like a protector." Patterson scowled. "Everyone step back. I'm taking control of this animal now." He marched forward, syringe in hand. Despite blood loss and clear pain, Ranger gave one final effort to shield the girl. He leaned down, licked her cheek, just once, a quiet, aching gesture that stopped several in their tracks. Then he turned to face Patterson, something weary and knowing in his amber gaze. Across town, in a rundown rental on the edge of El Paso, Mason Reynolds sat in front of his old TV, half focused on the screen, half lost in the fading photographs spread across his coffee table. 3 years gone, and Eleanor still haunted every frame. His grief therapist had said organizing their memories might bring closure. It hadn't. Each picture made the hole in his chest feel deeper. He reached to turn off the TV just as a red breaking news banner lit up the screen. We're receiving reports of a child mauled by a stray German Shepherd in Oak Ridge Heights, the anchor said. We go live to reporter Tyler Jenkins. Mason's hand froze, mid-motion. The mention of a German Shepherd brought one name to mind. He turned up the volume. On screen, a young reporter stood on a rain-slicked road, emergency lights flashing behind him. I'm standing here on Maple Street, where witnesses say a 6-year-old girl was attacked by a stray German Shepherd that's been roaming the area for weeks, Jenkins said solemnly. The child's condition is unclear, but sources tell U.S. there is significant blood loss. Police are prepared to put the dog down. The broadcast cut to the standoff. Through the grainy footage and bad lighting, something about the dog made Mason's heart drop. The posture, the ears. He leaned in closer. Rex, he whispered, as the reporter added that the officer on site might act before animal control. Arrived, Mason was already up, grabbing his coat and keys. It couldn't be Rex. The odds were insane. But his gut said otherwise, and Mason had learned to trust his gut. His truck roared to life and careened through the wet streets, tires shrieking. As he pushed the old thing faster than the law would ever allow, images rushed back of Rex, sitting silently beside him through hospital visits, insurance calls, the endless dread. Back when Eleanor first got sick, Rex had known before he did. The dog had leaned into his leg during that awful first phone call, grounding him in a moment when everything else spun out of control. Hold on, boy, Mason muttered under his breath, gripping the wheel tighter. Don't you leave me too. Back at the Whitfield home, paramedics finally convinced Patterson to let them near the girl while he kept his taser trained on the dog. They moved in carefully. Ranger didn't budge, just stared down at Emma like he could will her back awake. Pulse is fast but solid, one paramedic said. She's got a forehead gash, likely a concussion. We need to immobilize her. Her partner eyed the bleeding dog. What about him? Patterson didn't blink. Once the child is safe, animal control takes it from here. The female medic frowned. He's hurt bad, and I don't see any bite marks on the girl. Are we sure this was an attack? Patterson straightened, defensive. That's what the witnesses said. From the crowd, Sheila's voice rang out again, sharper now. They didn't see. I did. That dog didn't attack her, he saved her. Sarah Whitfield had finally been allowed close enough to hear. Confusion crept into her tear-streaked face. Saved her, she echoed. Sheila raised her cane, pointing toward the jagged railing on the second-floor balcony. Your little girl was out there during your argument. That railing gave out. She Phelan, this dog caught her. He took the hit, so she didn't. Daniel Whitfield turned toward the shattered metal, all color draining from his face. The concrete below was unforgiving. A fall like that could have ended Emma's life, forstolen her future. Is that true? He asked, voice small. I swear on my life, Sheila replied. That dog's been coming around for weeks. Emma's been feeding him from the balcony. They've bonded. She's been feeding a stray. Sheila's tone softened. It's the only thing that's made her smile since the accident. I was keeping notes. I meant to tell you when the time was right. Patterson looked skeptical. Nice story, ma'am. Doesn't change the fact we've got an injured, unstable dog to neutralize. The female medic finished bracing Emma's neck. We're ready to move her, she said, turning to Daniel. You riding with your daughter. Before he could respond, one of the Anderson teens stepped forward, holding his phone. I caught it on video. I was filming everything. The crowd leaned in, watching the grainy footage. Emma leaning on the railing, the sudden snap, the dog no hesitation, launching up to break her fall with his own body. Just like I said, Sheila said, chin high. A murmur swept through the neighbors. Patterson stared at the footage, his confidence shaken. Even if that's true, he said, weaker now, he's still injured, still unpredictable, protocol says. To hell with your protocol, Sarah cut in, her voice fierce and unshakable. That dog saved my daughter, as the medics gently transferred Emma onto the gurney. The dog Ranger finally gave out. The strength that had carried him this far drained from his battered body. He collapsed, his sides heaving with shallow breaths, blood seeping into the wet grass beneath him. He needs a vet right now, Sarah demanded, instinct taking over. Her training as a nurse eclipsed any trace of fear. Daniel, go with Emma. I'll stay with. She froze, unsure of the name. Ranger, Sheila supplied softly. That's what Emma calls him in all her drawings. Sarah nodded, crouching slowly beside the injured shepherd. I'll stay with Ranger until animal control gets here. Officer Patterson reholstered his taser but kept the tranquilizer ready. Ma'am, I highly recommend you, officer, Sarah cut in. I'm a registered nurse. I know trauma when I see it. This animal needs critical care, not a death. Sentence, he saved my daughter's life. The story was shifting. Neighbors who had earlier watched through windows with suspicion now leaned closer to the teen's phone, watching the footage unfold in silence. The viral rumor stray dog malls? Child was unraveling, replaced by something truer and far more remarkable. Tyler Jenkins, the local reporter who had pulled up minutes after the ambulance, picked up on the narrative shift and waved for his cameraman to roll tape. The wounded shepherd, now comforted by the child's mother, was becoming the center of a very different story. As the paramedics secured Emma into the ambulance, her small fingers twitched. Unconscious, but still reaching as. If searching for something, searching for someone, we've got motor response, one paramedic shouted. We need to roll, now. Daniel climbed in, his face tight with fear and guilt, as the doors slammed. Shut and sirens screamed into the stormy night. The crowd's attention pivoted to the fallen dog. Officer Patterson's radio crackled. Animal control, 2 minutes out. He keyed his mic. Tell M to bring a vet unit. We've got an injured animal Mitov, just saved a little girl's life. Sarah stayed kneeling beside Ranger, her hands moving with calm precision. Compound fracture on the front, leg, likely internal bleeding, deep gash near the ribs, she whispered, mostly to herself. He's going into shock. Beside her, Sheila Donovan, her face lined by time, her knees stiff-lowered herself onto the wet earth. Don't you dare give up on us, hero, she murmured, her weathered hand gently stroking the dog's blood-matted fur. At the sound of Emma's name, Ranger's eyes fluttered open. He whined weakly, but it was a sound. He knows her, Sarah breathed, her voice cracking. Her eyes brimmed with tears. He's been protecting her this whole time, and we didn't even realize. The mood in the crowd had shifted completely. The frightened, angry neighbors had become quiet witnesses. One woman brought an old quilt. From her car, a man offered his jacket to cover the dog. I called the emergency animal clinic, Mrs. Levine announced, tucking away her phone. They're sending a vet to meet animal control here. Tyler Jenkins, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, was already filming with fresh narration, in a stunning development. He intoned, what was believed to be a dog attack now appears to be a heroic rescue. Witnesses say the German Shepherd leaped beneath the collapsing railing to cushion the fall of 6-year-old Emma Whitfield during tonight's storm. Inside his truck a block away, Mason Reynolds heard the updated broadcast over the scanner. His fingers tightened around the wheel. The description they were describing Rex. He pulled onto Maple Street, fast heart pounding, parked half on the curb, and ran. He shoved through the small crowd, ignoring the stairs, drawn toward the blanket-covered form like a magnet. When his eyes locked on the bloodied shepherd surrounded by strangers, he stopped cold. Despite the grime and wounds, he knew instantly. The white patch on the chest, shaped like Texas, the torn ear from a barbed wire fence along the Sonora corridor. And those eyes still fierce, still faithful, Rex Mason whispered, dropping to his knees beside him. The dog stirred. Despite the pain, his ears twitched, and a quiet whimper left his throat. His tail moved once feebly. The crowd fell silent. Sarah looked up, startled. You know this dog. Mason nodded, too choked up to speak at first. He extended a hand, letting Rex sniff his fingers before stroking his head. He was my partner, Border Patrol, K9. Best damn dog I ever worked with. Patterson arched an eyebrow. You're saying this is a trained police dog? Mason found. His voice stronger now. Yes, his name's Rex. Service tag 8 to 9, 4K9. We worked Arizona for 6 years. I had to give him up when my wife got sick. I couldn't afford both. Sarah blinked. That was 5 years ago. How'd he end up here in Oak Ridge Heights? I don't know, Mason said, shaking his head. After the third shelter, I lost track. But this is him. I'd stake my life on it. He gently felt beneath the dog's right ear, his fingers landing on the tiny Taturix's ID, and what you saw. The fall, that's what he was trained to do. He could catch a falling hiker mid-slide. That's his protocol. At that moment, the animal control truck rolled in, followed by a small white van marked Emergency Vet. Mason looked up at Patterson, his voice steely. That dog is a decorated service canine. He used his training to save a child's life. He's coming with me for treatment. Patterson glanced at the crowd, now full of empathy. He gave a slow nod. We'll need your statement. But Yagatim treated. As the vet team began lifting Ranger carefully onto a stretcher, Mason leaned in close, pressing his forehead against the dog's. Stay with me, partner, he murmured. I'm not losing you again. Rex's amber eyes locked onto Mason's. With a flicker of recognition, maybe even forgiveness, he didn't look away as they raised him gently into the waiting van. Whatever time or distance had passed, it hadn't erased the bond between them. That trust, the kind born only in life-or-death missions, was still there. And Mason, climbing in beside him, wasn't letting go this time. His injured partner Sarah stepped up to the open van door. My husband took our daughter to Memorial Hospital, she said, her voice calm despite the chaos of the evening. Please, ... take my number. I have to know if Ranger pulls through. Ranger, Mason echoed softly, trying the name for the first time. It fit. He saved the contact. In his phone, then met her eyes without flinching. He's the toughest dog I've ever known. If anyone can survive this, it's him. The veterinary van pulled away, emergency lights spinning but sirens silent out of respect for the trauma-scarred animals on board. Behind them, the crowd. Thinned, neighbors slipping back into their homes, carrying a very different tale than the one that had originally lured them out. Sheila Donovan lingered on the Whitfield's front lawn, watching the van vanish around the bend. Well, she murmured to no one in particular. I always knew that dog was something else. She turned to Sarah, who stood motionless in her yard, smeared in the blood of both her daughter and the dog who saved her. Come on now, querida. Let's get you cleaned up so you can be with your little girl. Emma's going to need her mama when she wakes up. The two women moved slowly toward the porch. Across the street, news anchor Tyler Jenkins wrapped his live report with words that would ripple far beyond Oak Ridge Heights in a world often numbed by cruelty and neglect. Tonight, we witnessed something profoundly Movanga, Stray risking everything to protect the child who believed in him. It's a reminder that true courage can wear fur, and that the love between human and animal sometimes defies logic. The broadcast would come to be known as The Miracle on Maple Street. Inside the harshly lit pediatric wing of Memorial Hospital, Daniel Whitfield sat beside Emma's bed, her small fingers wrapped in his much larger hand. 3 hours had passed tests, specialists, explanations he barely absorbed, each one landing like a stone on his chest. Mild to moderate concussion, the neurologist had said. No signs of internal bleeding, which is excellent. 7 stitches for the gash above. Her eyebrow. They expected a full recovery. But what the doctor hadn't said Daniel couldn't stop hearing, was how much worse it should have been. A fall from that height usually meant skull fractures, spinal trauma, even death. And yet here she was hurt, yes, but healing. Because of a stray dog who had somehow acted with precision and purpose. A dog Daniel had tried to get rid of twice. Emma hadn't woken yet, but the nurses said her vitals were strong, her breathing steady. They'd cleaned the blood and debris, leaving her pale and impossibly small under the thin hospital blanket. His phone buzzed with new messages, Sarah, updating him on the dog's condition. She called him Ranger now. The name landed differently this time, like it had weight, like it meant something, not just a stray, a guardian. Mr. Whitfield, a nurse, appeared in the doorway. Your wife just called. She's on her way up. There's also a police officer here who'd like a word when you're ready." Daniel gave a small nod. Speaking would have cracked him wide open. The idea of giving a statement made his gut churn. Would he have to admit they'd been too wrapped up in their argument to notice their daughter in danger? That they were considering sending her away while she was building a secret bond with a dog they had ignored? The steady beeping of the monitors offered no comfort as Daniel sat in silence, the weight of failure pressing into every breath. His thoughts spiraled to the balcony, the one with the faulty railing. He'd seen the rusted bolts, had promised to fix it months ago, but life kept getting in the way. The shame sat like cement in his stomach. Meanwhile, across town at Oak Ridge Emergency Veterinary Clinic, a different kind of urgency filled the air. Mason Reynolds paced the small waiting room, glancing through the glass panels into the surgical suite. Inside, a flurry of motion surrounded Ranger's limp body, multiple fractures in the front leg. The vet had told him quickly, internal, bleeding, ruptured spleen. We're administering a transfusion and prepping for emergency surgery. Mason had just nodded, instincts from his days with Border Patrol kicking in. When the receptionist delicately asked about costs, mentioning thousands in surgical and UACU expenses, Mason had passed over his credit card without blinking. The debt would bury him, but he didn't care. Not this time. He wouldn't abandon Rex again. Not after everything. As the team fought to save his former canine partner, Mason's mind drifted to the last time they'd been together. That morning at the facility, Rex had jumped into the truck like it was any other day. But at WASN, single quotes T. Mason had held it together, until he had to pass the leash to the handler from the retirement agency. Rex had looked between them, waiting for a command he didn't understand. When Mason finally whispered, "Forward," the dog hesitated for the first time in years. His amber eyes held a question. "It's okay, buddy," Mason had said, his voice cracking. "You can go." That memory still burned. The medical debt from Eleanor's illness had cost him everything: his savings, his home, his marriage, and Rex. Somehow, the dog had ended up abandoned, surviving alone, until fate placed him beside a child who needed him more than anyone ever had. The operating room doors banged open. Yanking Mason back to the present, Dr. Cassidy, the lead surgeon, stepped out, surgical mask loose around her neck. "Mr. Reynolds, we've stabilized him. The spleen is gone, and we've pinned the leg. The next 24 hours are critical." But he's a fighter. Mason let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Can I see him?" Dr. Cassidy gave a tired nod. "He's still under, but sometimes hearing a familiar voice helps." She led Mason into recovery. Ranger lay motionless. On a cushioned table, hooked up to IVs, his breathing shallow but steady. His leg was bandaged tightly, splinted, and elevated. Mason stepped forward, voice low, heart full. "You hang in there, partner. I'm right here." The fur around his ribs and much of his flank had been shaved clean, leaving behind raw, exposed skin that looked almost ghostly under the fluorescent lights. Monitors surrounded the operating table, each mechanical beep a fragile lifeline. He was just a stray Tomasta street dog with no pedigree, no papers. But to Mason, Ranger was everything. A protector, a survivor. A soul who'd stood between death and a little girl. "Hey, champ," Mason murmured, leaning close, letting the dog breathe in his familiar scent near the muzzle, where memory still lingered. "You were incredible. Now it's your turn to hang on." The vitals monitor let out a steadier rhythm, almost as if Ranger heard him. Dr. Cassidy glanced at the screen, lifting an eyebrow. "He recognizes you," she said softly. "Even now, that's not common." "It's been 5 years," Mason replied, voice low, eyes locked on Ranger. "But bonds like this, they don't snap." His phone buzzed, an unknown number. Stepping out of the sterile quiet, he answered. The night air chilled his skin. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Sarah Whitfield, Emma's mom. I just wanted to check on Ranger," Mason exhaled, stepping into the shadows beside the clinic's brick wall. He made it through surgery. Next 24 hours are going to be critical. But the vet's hopeful. He heard her shaky sigh through the line. "Thank God I'm at the hospital with Emma. She's stable, still unconscious, but they think she'll be okay. The doctors say she owes her life to Ranger." Her voice broke. Mason could feel the heaviness behind it. "And you? How are you holding up?" She hesitated, caught off guard by the question, trying to make sense of everything. It's all happened so fast, and now we're learning things about Emma, about Ranger, that we never knew. Our neighbor Sheila mentioned Emma's been drawing pictures of him for weeks. Said that dog was the only thing that's brought her joy since the accident. Mason stared into the darkness, heart tightening. Ranger's not just a patrol dog. He was trained for trauma support too. Maybe he saw something in her, something she needed. She went quiet a moment, then said, "When he recovers, if he recovers, what happens to him?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of questions neither had the strength to voice. "Legally, he's still mine," Mason explained. "I gave him to the K-9 unit, but looks like they've retired him quietly. I'll have to dig through the files, but as his original handler, I probably have first claim." "Of course," Sarah rushed to say. "I didn't mean to. It's not about ownership," Mason interrupted gently. "It's about what's best for him, and for Emma." Before she could respond, another call came through on her end. "It's the hospital. I'll call you back." The line clicked off. Inside the hospital, something had shifted. The sterile silence was broken. Emma had opened her eyes. "Mommy." The sound was barely above a whisper, scratchy from disuse, but it thundered through the room. Sarah froze, phone limp in her hand. Her daughter, silent for 18 months, was now trying to sit up, groggy and blinking under harsh hospital lights. Daniel stood beside her, tears streaking his cheeks. "She spoke," he whispered, stunned. "Sarah, she spoke." Moving as if in a trance, Sarah edged closer to the bed, settling next to her daughter. "I'm here. Baby mommy's here." Emma, dazed and medicated, scanned the room. "Where's Ranger?" Every syllable sounded like a miracle. Sarah and Daniel exchanged a look, shock and disbelief, mingling with guilt. They hadn't even known the dog existed in her life. Until now. "Ranger's at the vet clinic," Sarah answered, squeezing her daughter's hand. "He got hurt saving you, but they're taking care of him." Emma's face crunkled. "He caught me. I was falling, and the railing broke, and he jumped." Her small body trembled with emotion. "Is he gonna die?" "No, baby," Daniel replied quickly, moving to her side. "He's strong. He's got doctors, too, just like you." Emma looked from one parent to the other, her little face serious beyond her years. "He listens to me. Even when I don't talk, he understands." Sarah brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, careful not to touch the bandage. "How long have you been friends with Ranger, sweetheart?" 23 days, Emma said without hesitation. "He came to our yard. He looked lonely. I gave him half my sandwich. He came back the next day." The clarity of her response down to the exact number of days cut through their emotions, like a blade. She hadn't just played with a stray. She'd kept track. "You went out to the balcony?" Daniel asked, fighting back dread. Emma nodded. "Every day after school, he'd wait under the tree. About sending me away, I got scared. I wanted to say goodbye." That confession struck them both. Like a slap, Daniel's eyes met Sarah's. In that glance, a storm of regret passed between them. Their arguments, their oversight, the price nearly paid. "You're not going anywhere," Sarah said, voice trembling but firm. "We were trying to find help, and we made a mistake. A big one," Daniel added, throat tight. "We should have seen what was helping you?" Ranger Emma's eyelids fluttered. Sleep tugged at her. The medicine was winning. "Can he stay with us when he's better?" He didn't have a home before. The question hung in the air like prayer. Before either could answer, a knock came at the door. Officer Patterson peeked in, his demeanor drastically different than earlier. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. Sorry to interrupt, but I need your statements while everything's fresh." His eyes landed on Emoywake, barely and widened. "Oh? I can come back." "No, it's fine," Daniel said, watching Emma drift back into sleep. She just nodded off again. Patterson stepped inside, hat in hand, visibly shaken. "I owe you both an apology. I jumped to conclusions. If it hadn't been for your neighbor and that security footage," he cleared his throat, "it could have gone very badly." For Ranger, Sarah, exhausted, simply nodded. "You did what you thought was right." But Patterson wasn't done. "Still, I should have listened to Mrs. Donovan earlier. We're re-evaluating our department's protocols on how we handle animal cases. It's overdue." As he began taking notes, a commotion rose out in the hallway. Tyler Jenkins, the same reporter who'd first rushed to label it a dog attack, showed up again, this time with a cameraman trailing behind, trying to talk his way past the nurse's station and into Emma's room. "This story's blowing up online," he insisted to the stone-faced nurse. "A little girl rescued by a stray dog. It's the kind of human story people eat up." The nurse didn't flinch. "This is a pediatric ward, not a media circus," she said firmly. "That child's recovering from a concussion. She needs sleep, not a camera in her face." Patterson had stepped aside earlier, but returned just in time to lend his badge's weight to the hospital's denial. What followed was a tense, awkward exchange that ended with Jenkins backing off, though not before vowing to revisit the story. When the timing was right, Patterson rejoined the room, face drawn. "You should know," he said, "the video of Ranger catching Emma's fall is already viral. Thousands of shares. You might want to brace for attention once the dust settles." Sarah exhaled and looked at her daughter, sleeping under a mess of hospital blankets. "Right now, the only thing we care about is Emma and Ranger." Speaking of, Daniel said, "What happens now? I mean, legally, he's technically a stray. But his original handler turned up and clearly he's bonded with Emma." Patterson rubbed the back of his neck, visibly torn. "It's a gray area," he admitted. "Normally, a stray goes to the shelter. But, given his background and what he just did, there's leeway. The department will help sort things out with everyone involved." He hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic warmth, "for what it's worth. I've never seen anything like that. That wasn't just obedience. That was something else entirely." As Patterson walked out with their statements in hand, Sarah and Daniel remained still, wrapped in the quiet beep of the monitors, their thoughts heavier than words. "Daniel," Sarah finally whispered, her voice the first she'd spoken to him in over a year and a half. He took her hand, his eyes locked on Emma's face. "She found her way back," Sarah continued, "and we kept fighting about clinics and specialists, and all along she had that dog. That same stray we wanted. Removed from the neighborhood, neither of them said the word regret, but it hung between them, sharp and undeniable. They owed everything to that animal, a creature who had somehow succeeded where trained professionals had failed. When she wakes up again, know that yet?" Daniel nodded, no hesitation. "We owe her that," he said softly. "And we owe him that much, too." It marked the beginning of a day the Whitfield family would never forget, a day their daughter had found her voice again, delivered not by medicine, but by the silent loyalty of a dog who refused to let her fall. Dawn crept over Oak Ridge Heights, with the kind of calm that pays no mind to human grief or joy. At the emergency animal clinic, the night shift was handing off to the day crew, groggy technicians briefing each other in hushed voices. In ICU, Ranger, still marked as unknown stray, remained in critical but stable condition. No change since 4 a.m. The vet tech murmured, handing over the chart to Dr. Cassidy. "Vitals are holding, but that pulse is weaker than I'd like." Dr. Cassidy nodded grimly. She didn't need to hear more. She'd seen it before, dogs who survived the knife, only to slip away in the aftermath. Internal trauma took more than sutures to mend, and Rangers age along with the rough years. On the street stacked the odds against him. In the waiting area, Mason Reynolds sat motionless in a plastic chair, his hands clasped between his knees. Despite gentle nudging from staff, he hadn't moved all night. Dr. Cassidy approached quietly. Mason rose, reading her face before she even spoke. "He's not improving, is he?" he asked. "Not worse, either," she said, lowering herself into the seat beside him, "but not better. The bleeding was extensive. We did what we could, but his system's taken a major hit. He's fighting, but the truth is, the odds are about 50-50 right now." Mason gave a small nod, bracing. "And if he makes it," she went on, "there's a long road ahead, multiple surgeries, physical therapy. The repair to his leg alone is going to cost upward of $8,000, and that's just the start." His face didn't move, but his knuckles whitened under the pressure of his clasped hands. "I get it," he said quietly. "There are options," Dr. Cassidy added gently. "If it's too much, no." The word came out hard. He softened his tone immediately. "I'm sorry, but no. Mason's wasn't either. It was something else. Loyalty, maybe. Something deeper." "I should tell you," she added. "The phones started ringing this morning. Local coverage got attention. We could open a fund for his care. Mason flinched instinctively. He'd always handled things himself, never once asked for help. But his late wife's long illness had taught him humility. And now wasn't the time for pride. That would be appreciated, he said after a pause, as Dr. Cassidy walked away. His phone buzzed. Sarah Whitfield's name lit the screen. "How is he?" she asked the moment he picked up. "Still hanging on," Mason answered, leaving out the worst of it. "How's Emma?" "She's awake and asking about him," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "The doctors are stunned. Her concussion's mild. But the real shock is she's talking, Mason. Full sentences. She hasn't done that in almost 2 years." Mason leaned forward, head in his hand. Relief, fear, all collided at once. "That's incredible," he said, his voice raw. "There's more," Sarah continued. "The hospital brought in a child psychologist. They were curious, wanted to understand how this happened. Emma told her everything. That she's been sneaking Ranger food for weeks. That she talked to him, Evan, when she couldn't talk to us." She paused, swallowing emotion. "The psychologist thinks he gave her what none of us could. No pressure, no expectations, just unconditional presence." Mason stared at the far wall as his throat tightened. Something necessary, and for the first time that morning, Mason allowed himself to hope. Mason shut his eyes, safe enough to hear the words she'd kept locked inside. "Listen," Sarah said, her voice shifting slightly. "Sea Ranger." She paused, then added, "And we'd like to talk about what comes next." Mason nodded, even though the thought of that conversation made his chest tighten. What was the right move? Legally, Ranger belonged to him, his former partner. But the connection between that dog and Emma was something rare, something healing. To pull them apart felt cruel, but letting go of Rex again? That felt like losing a part of himself twice. When the call ended, Mason stepped outside the clinic for errand. Immediately froze. Cameras, reporters, a small crowd. The story had spread much faster than he'd expected. "Mr. Reynolds, is it true you were Ranger's original handler? Was he really trained as a Border Patrol canine? What's it like being reunited after all these years?" Mason raised one hand, shielding his eyes from the glare of sunlight and snapping shutters. "No comment right now," he said, trying to keep his tone calm. "Please, Ranger's in. Critical condition. Show some respect." As he turned and headed back inside, the receptionist met him with a stack of notes. One man called 3 times, she said, half apologetic. Said dogs like Ranger should be put down, no exceptions. That it's just a matter of time before he hurts someone again. Mason clenched the slips into his palm. "Can we keep people like that away from here?" he muttered. "Ranger doesn't need that kind of noise, and neither do I." Before she could respond, Dr. Cassidy stepped out from the treatment area. Her face said everything. "Mr. Reynolds," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Mason's heart dropped. He followed her to a side consultation room, already bracing himself for that delicate, measured tone doctors use when they're about to change someone's life. "Ranger's taken a turn for the worse," she said after. She closed the door. "His blood pressure is falling, and he's showing signs of disseminated intravascular coagulation. Basically, his blood's not clotting anymore. It's a complication from the trauma and blood loss." Mason's mouth felt dry. "What can you do?" he asked. "We're giving him plasma medications, but, I have to be honest, it doesn't look good. You should think about calling anyone who'd want to say goodbye." The word goodbye hit Mason like a hammer. Again, he was supposed to say goodbye to this dog, again the one he'd already lost once. "The Whitfields," he said quietly. "Their daughter, Emma Ranger's, been everything to her. She just started speaking again, because of him." Cassidy nodded gently. "Call them. I'll keep doing everything I can in the meantime." But Mason didn't need her to finish that thought. As he reached for his phone, his eyes burned. How do you tell a 6-year-old child that the dog who saved Hurtweiss might not live long enough to hear her say his name? Outside the clinic window, the crowd of reporters had only grown. The story of a heroic stray was picking up speed by the hour. But inside where it mattered most, one life hung by a thread, and with it, a child's fragile new voice. Sarah's. Phone rang just as she was helping Emma into the clothes Daniel had brought from home. Morning sunlight filled the room, and Emma's doctor had just given cautious approval for discharge the next day if her neurochecks stayed clear. Despite the bandage on her head and the fatigue that still clung to her, Emma had been full of energy all morning, asking again and again when she could see Ranger. When Sarah saw Mason's name, her stomach dropped. She stepped into the hallway before answering, not wanting Emma to hear. The moment Mason spoke, Sarah caught the tremor in his voice, controlled but unmistakable. "How soon can you get to the clinic?" he asked, then explained Ranger's condition. "Dr. Cassidy says, if there's something to say, needs to be said soon." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself against the wall. "Emma's not technically cleared for discharge," she said, "but I'll speak with her doctor, see what's possible." What followed was a whirlwind. Sarah pleading with the neurologist. The initial no, then reluctant interest, then finalia. Reluctant, yes. Emma could go for 1 hour with a nurse in a wheelchair. Straight there, straight back. No detours. "I have to tell her first," Sarah whispered to Daniel once it was all arranged. "She needs to know." Daniel gave a grave nod. "Do you want me to?" "No," Sarah said gently, shaking her head. This was her ground. She'd delivered difficult truths 100 times as a nurse, but this, this was different. She paused outside Emma's room, gathering herself, then opened the door. Emma looked up instantly, her eyes so like Daniel's bright. With hope, "Can we go see Ranger now?" she asked. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, holding Emma's tiny hands. "Yes, sweetheart. The doctor said you can visit, but just for a short while. I need to tell you something important first." Her voice softened. "Ranger's very sick. Baby, his wounds. They're worse than they thought. The doctors are trying their best, but ... he might die." Emma finished for her. Her voice was soft but sure, like Grandpa. Sarah nodded, fighting the tightness in her throat. "Yes, baby, he might. Mason, the man who used to work with Ranger, he thought you might want to say goodbye." Just in case, Emma didn't speak right away. She sat quietly, staring at her blanket, processing. When she finally looked up, there was something fierce in her expression. "I need my drawings," she said. "The ones I made for Ranger." "Sweetie, we don't have time to go home. Not those," Emma interrupted, pointing at her small pink backpack. "The ones in there. I always carry them." Sarah opened the backpack. Inside, Emma had tucked a folder filled with crayon sketches. Ranger sitting beneath her window. Ranger leaping for a ball. Ranger curled under the oak tree. Each picture was astonishingly detailed. The alert ears, the white chest patch, the way he tilted his head while listening. "I want to bring these," Emma said firmly, "and I need to tell him something, myself." Within half an hour, they reached the clinic. Emma was wheeled through a side staff entrance by Nurse Melissa, her drawings clutched tight to her chest. The main waiting area was packed news crews, strangers hoping for a glimpse. But Dr. Cassidy had planned ahead, guiding them through the back to avoid the chaos. Mason, the retired canine handler, met them at the hospital entrance. His face was drawn, worn by worry and nights without rest. He crouched down to meet Emma's gaze, speaking gently. "Your dog's really something special," she said solemnly. "He understands people." A faint, tired smile crossed Mason's lips. He always did. That's what made him such a great cop. Dr. Cassidy stepped out from a nearby corridor, her face calm but her tone cautious. "We've moved Ranger to a quiet space so you can be with him privately. Just so you know, he's hooked up to a lot of machines and may not respond. He's in a fragile state." She guided them down a hallway to a repurposed office. Ranger lay on a padded table, surrounded by blinking monitors. 4 tubes snaked from his legs, his breathing shallow and uneven. His body had been shaved in places for surgery, exposing pale, vulnerable skin. The proud frame that once tackled criminals now looked fragile and still. Emma gasped, the sound sharp and small in the quiet room. A nurse wheeled her closer, and Mason gently lifted her from the chair to give her a better view. "Can I pet him?" she whispered. Dr. Cassidy nodded softly, just his head stayed clear of the lines. With quiet reverence, Emma placed her little hand just behind his ear. Then something shifted. Ranger's eyelids fluttered, first blank, then, slowly focusing, his tail moved once barely a soft thump against the table. "Hi, Ranger," Emma said, her voice clearer now. "I brought the pictures I made for you." Sarah carefully laid the colorful drawings out where Ranger could see them. The dog's eyes followed the movement, and his chest seemed to rise more easily. "The doctors say you're really sick," Emma continued, gently stroking his fur. "But I need you to get better," she smiled faintly. "Because now I can talk, Hand. I have so much to tell you." Mason stepped back, letting the moment unfold, while Sarah noticed the emotion he struggled to hold in. Ranger had been his partner, his shadow, but right now, it was this little girl the dog responded to. "I brought this too," Emma said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small, scratched dog tag that gleamed under the room's lights. "I found it under the oak tree where you nap sometimes. I think it fell off your old collar." She handed it to Mason, who looked at it, stunned. It was Rex's original Border Patrol tag, the one he'd turned in when he gave Ranger up. Somehow, through years of transfers and shelters, the dog had kept this last piece of his past. "May I, Mason?" asked Emma, motioning toward Ranger. She nodded. Mason held the tag near the dog's nose. The reaction was immediate. Ranger's eyes sharpened, and he pushed his head forward slightly, a faint whimper escaping his throat. "He remembers," Mason said thickly. "He knows who he is." Dr. Cassidy, quietly monitoring the screens, made a small sound. "His vitals just improved," she murmured. "Heart rate stabilizing, blood pressures climbing." Emma kept talking, unaware of the monitors. She told Ranger about the hospital, about the kind nurses, how her parents had stopped yelling. Her hand never left his fur, and his eyes never strayed from her face. "Remember when those mean boys threw rocks at Mrs. Donovan's cat? You scared them off. Or when that baby bird fell out of the tree. You just sat next to it until I got Mom to help." Sarah and Daniel exchanged shocked glances. These were moments they'd never heard about. Stories their daughter had hidden behind silence. "He watched over the bird," Sarah asked softly. Emma nodded. "He protects everyone. He even saved Mr. Jenkins from bad guys trying to steal his money. That's why Mr. Jenkins stays under the bridge now, 'cause Ranger looks out for him." Mason's eyes snapped up. "Jenkins, the guy who stays near Cooper's Bridge? Huh. He gives Ranger treats sometimes. Says Ranger chased off the men hurting him. He calls Ranger the Guardian." The words hung in the air like a slow revelation. Ranger hadn't just saved Emma, he'd been quietly defending others all along. Dr. Cassidy returned, brisk and focused. "I just spoke with our top surgeon. There's a higher-risk procedure that might fix the clotting issue. It's expensive, and the outcome isn't guaranteed." "Money's not a problem," Daniel said firmly, stepping forward. "We'll pay for it." Mason looked stunned. "You mean that—" "Sarah and I talked it through. Ranger saved Emma's life. Whatever it takes." Dr. Cassidy nodded, already prepping to alert the surgical team. Mason stood in silence, emotions roiling beneath his composed face. "That's incredibly generous. But he's my responsibility. He's part of all of us now," Sarah replied. "There's no price on what he's done for her." Emma, turning from Ranger, asked the question everyone feared. "Is Ranger going to die?" Her eyes darted between the adults. "The doctors are trying something new," Sarah said carefully. "But even with the best medicine, sometimes animals, he won't die," Emma interrupted with quiet strength. "He made me a promise." "A promise?" Daniel asked. Emma nodded. "When I told him I was scared about going to that place for kids who don't talk, he put his paw on my shoe and stared at me like this." She mimicked Ranger's deep, knowing gaze. "That means I'll still be here when you get back. So he can't die," he promised. The certainty in her voice silenced the room. As if understanding, Ranger strained again. This time, his head lifted just enough to press his nose against Emma's hand, a slow, purposeful movement. Dr. Cassidy, entering to check his stats, stopped in the doorway. She watched the scene with wide eyes. "His vitals are still rising," she said, double-checking the screen. "Honestly." She glanced at Emma, still whispering softly into Ranger's ear, her small fingers steady on his fur, sometimes in veterinary work. "You see animals hanging on, rallying, when they're with someone they deeply trust. It's not something you'll find in a textbook, but the vet just gave a half smile. We take healing wherever it shows up." As the staff prepared to transfer Ranger for another round of treatment, Mason took Daniel aside. His face was serious, brows drawn. "Mr. Whitfield, we should talk about Ranger's future where he belongs once this is all over." Daniel gave a slow nod, watching Emma kneel beside the gurney, whispering promises to her four-legged friend. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "We really should." Neither man knew that just outside the animal clinic, Tyler Jenkins was with Sheila Donovan, who clutched a large manila envelope. "I've been keeping records on that dog for over a month," she said, laying out photo after photo of Ranger and Emma. That little girl hadn't made a sound in a year and a half. But every afternoon at 4:30 sharp, she'd step out on that balcony and he'd be there, waiting. The camera zoomed in on an image, Emma tossing treats down to Ranger, his eyes fixed on hers, a silent world between them. "They were talking," Sheila insisted, her raspy voice steady. "Not with words, but with something deeper. That's not just a stray, hun. That's a four-legged miracle." 3 weeks later, on a brisk October morning, Sarah Whitfield stood at the kitchen window, watching a quiet moment unfold in their backyard. The maple leaves blazed red and gold, their color blanketing the lawn, around a wooden bench nestled under the oldest oak. Emma sat cross-legged in the grass, reading aloud from a picture book, her voice light and full of expression. Ranger rested beside her, sprawled in the golden sunlight, ears perked as if catching every syllable. His recovery, as Dr. Cassidy described it, had been nothing short of a miracle. After the clotting procedure, his vitals stabilized quickly. His leg, still wrapped in a protective cast, bore a long healing scar where they had opened him up to stop internal bleeding. But he was healing day by day. 10 days after surgery, he was released into Mason's care with instructions for rest and regular checkups. But Ranger wasn't spending his time in Mason's apartment. He was here in the Whitfields' yard. Nearly every day now, the whole thing had unfolded naturally after Emma came home from the hospital. Mason brought Ranger by just for a short visit once the dog could handle the car ride. When Emma saw him, the joy on her face cracked something wide open in everyone. That very afternoon, Daniel had pulled Mason aside. What followed was something like a joint custody agreement. Ranger would stay at the Whitfields during the day, so Emma could continue their healing and return to Mason's place at night. "He's saved her twice," Daniel said, eyes wet. "Once when he broke her fall, and again when he gave her back her voice. We can't take him away from her now." Mason hadn't hesitated. His bond with Ranger ran deep, but even he knew it couldn't compare to what was happening between that child and the dog. And so, this new rhythm formed one built not just on love and responsibility, but on something sacred. Mason remained close, and Ranger became something new, not a patrol dog, not a wanderer, but a guardian, and a lifeline between two grieving families. Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door. Daniel stepped in, followed by Mason, both of them juggling brown paper bags. "We got everything on the list," Daniel announced, dropping his haul onto the kitchen island, though Mason insisted on the fancy dog food that costs more than our groceries. Mason chuckled, the sound lighter than it had been in years. The past few weeks had softened him, the hard edges of guilt and grief smoothing just a little. "He's earned it," Mason said simply, unpacking a bottle of supplements Dr. Cassidy had recommended for Ranger's joints. Sarah watched the way the two men moved, no, not like strangers forced into collaboration, but friends who shared something unspoken. Mason's canine experience had been a gift, helping Ranger adjust to this new life and helping Emma learn how to care for her best friend. What had started as an uncertain negotiation over a dog had become something like family. "How's the party planning going?" Daniel asked, eyeing the invitations stacked neatly on the table. "Almost done," Sarah replied. "Sheila's handling the flyers, and Emma's therapist thinks it's a great idea." Emma had come up with it herself, Ranger Recognition Day. During one of her therapy sessions, at first, it was meant to be a thank you event for the people who helped save Ranger. But it had grown now. It was a community gathering, raising money for the vet clinic's emergency fund and a brand new program to find homes for retired service animals. Out in the backyard, Emma had finished reading and was now helping Ranger with his physical therapy. Slowly, patiently, she stretched his leg like Dr. Cassidy had shown her. Ranger didn't resist instead. He offered gentle licks as Emma praised him. "That's it, buddy," she murmured, her voice full of warmth. Daniel joined Sarah by the window, awe on his face. 6 weeks ago, we were preparing to send her away. She wouldn't say a word. Now, he trailed off, eyes glassy. Emma's voice filtered through the cracked window as she counted. "That's 3, Ranger. You're the bravest dog in the world. Just a few more. 1, 2. Good boy." Sarah leaned into Daniel, letting the comfort of him wash over her. The strain that had almost torn them apart over Emma's care, over what to do, had melted. Now they stood together, united in hope. The papers for the residential center had been shredded. Emma's therapy now focused on processing, not pushing, on understanding, not forcing. They had let her heal at her own pace, and somehow it was working. "Did you catch the news this morning?" Mason asked as he stepped beside them. "State legislatures reviewing something called Ranger's Law. Tougher penalties for abandoning service animals and funding to help place retired dogs with families who need them." Sarah nodded. "Tyler called about it. Wants an interview after the party." She paused, eyes on Emma as she rewrapped Ranger's bandage with slow, careful hands. "It's wild how far the ripple has gone," Sheila said. "Donations to shelters are up 300%. And your new consulting gig," Daniel added. 3 departments asking for canine program reviews just this month." Mason gave a modest shrug, though the pride was clear in his eyes. It became clear that the unexpected attention around Ranger's story had opened doors no one saw coming. Questions poured in about his work with Border Patrol, K-9 South, and soon offers arrived consulting gigs to help police departments rethink their training methods. The steady income let him rent a small place just a block from the Whitfields, close enough to check in on Rex whenever he missed the old rhythm of partnership. Outside, Emma had completed Rex's rehab for the day and now sat cross-legged beneath the big oak, the dog's massive head resting across her knees while she ran gentle fingers along his ears. Her lips moved softly, murmuring in a hush only. Rex could truly understand a girl talking to her best friend, as if confiding truths she hadn't yet dared say aloud to anyone else. Across the street, Sheila Donovan sat at her usual perch by the window, her lined face calm, a knowing smile. Pulling gently at her mouth. The arthritis still ached in her hands since that stormy night, but she never missed a day. Her notebook now, with a new section titled simply Malagrissoise, filling up with the details of what she saw, Emma laughing again. Ranger getting stronger, and a family quietly reassembling itself, piece by precious piece. "Told you he wasn't just any dog," she whispered to Butterscotch, who lay curled on the windowsill, twitching in sleep. "You can't always explain these things. Some hearts just know." That afternoon sunlight had mellowed into something golden. And still, when Mason stepped out the front door, he didn't say anything at first, just walked over with a familiar energy that made Rex's tail begin to wag low and steady, a beat of happiness that pulsed through the grass. "One last walk, partner," Mason said, his voice wrapped in the warmth of old routines. The words sparked something in Rex, who slowly pushed himself upright, favoring one leg but ready. Emma stood too, sliding her small hand into Mason's rough one without hesitation, like someone who had learned the hard way, who could be trusted, and who couldn't. Together, they moved across the yard at an easy pace, the dog walking between them, a bridge between everything broken and everything beginning again. From the kitchen window, Sarah and Daniel stood close, watching. It wasn't a picture book family, not conventional, not planned, but it was real, and it worked. It fit like puzzle pieces that had never belonged to the same box, but somehow clicked perfectly into place. By saving Emma, Ranger had done more than rescue a child. He had rescued all of them, each in a different way. And in rescuing him, they'd uncovered strengths they didn't know they had, courage that had been dormant. Kindness they'd forgotten was still in them. "For a dog no one wanted," Daniel said quietly, resting his hand on Sarah's hip. "He sure turned out all right." Sarah leaned into him, her eyes never leaving the yard where their daughter laughed out loud at something Mason said. Her laugh was clear, light. "He wasn't nobody's," she said gently. "He was always ours. We just didn't realize it yet. Sometimes life doesn't hand you beauty wrapped up in shiny ribbons. Sometimes it shows up muddy and limping, with fur full of burrs and eyes that carry weight. Ranger's story reminds us that redemption isn't just for youth, it's for all of us who've known loss, who've buried dreams, who've stood in dark rooms waiting for dawn. Mason lost his partner once, only to find him again, right when both their lives were unraveling. The bond between Emma and Ranger wasn't built on commands, it was built in silence, built in pain. In moments when there were no words, just breath, just presence, in a world that often overlooks the worth of those who've grown older, human or dog. This story is a quiet anthem to second chances, to loyalty that doesn't expire, to the kind of love that stays when everything else falls apart. Those of us who've lived long enough understand this, that families aren't always made by blood. They're made by showing up, by choosing each other, by staying. And sometimes, when our bones ache and our hearts carry too many stories, it's a dog-like ranger who walks beside us and reminds us we still have something to give. Our care, our love, our fierce, quiet strength.